one of the moments, early on in my career when I was living in China, I was flying from Shanghai to Shenzhen, and I looked out the window of the plane, and I saw basically an island of styrofoam.
And that's what we capture with the environmental, the social, and the governance factors. It's about the habit of the business.
Education actually plays a large role in this, in both terms of consumers making better choices and brands offering the better choices.
The world is evolving. The problems we're facing are too big to be solved by any organization alone. A lot is uncertain, but one thing is for sure: change is coming. And the voices you've just heard are the people driving it, entrepreneurial leaders. Welcome to From Problems to Possibilities, Entrepreneurial Leadership in Action, presented by Babson College. On this podcast, we'll meet the entrepreneurial leaders in the Babson community and beyond who are working on solving some of the world's biggest problems with the passion and skills that the world needs today. How does an entrepreneurial leader look at a problem and then get to the solution? I'm your host, Maddie Poirier, and together we'll go from problems to possibilities. If you live in the US, chances are you have a lot of stuff, or at least you want to have a lot of stuff. As the MIT Press Reader notes in their brief history of consumer culture, quote, "Consumption is now frequently seen as our principal role in the world," unquote.
The consumer, they call us. We're the people that buy.
We've been trained, in a way, to want more stuff. And that stuff takes a lot of resources to make, to ship, and then at the end of its life, to dispose of. And as sustainability becomes an increasingly important conversation for our collective future, how are brands looking at these problems? How do we account for all this waste and the energy that we're consuming? Can a company make consumer goods like clothes and electronics more sustainable without sacrificing their bottom line? Today, we're tackling just about the biggest entrepreneurial problem there is in consumer goods: sustainability. We'll hear from two Babson alumni and entrepreneurial leaders who are at the forefront of reimagining processes in their businesses, pointing us towards a more sustainable future and perhaps also a more thoughtful approach to consumerism. And we'll speak with a renowned Babson accounting scholar who will help us understand how integrating sustainability practices into your balance sheet can not only create tangible value, but intangible value for your brand as well. Now, on From Problems to Possibilities, the stuff behind sustainability.
So where I come from in India, this place called Chandigarh, it's actually, I would say, a utopia within India, because it's one of the only planned cities of India where it was planned before it was built. So I think that also really contributes to my inherent need to see order in the world. It's one of the cleanest cities in India, which I'm very proud of personally.
Uddhav Bagrodia, a Babson alum and the co-founder and president of Wastewear, spent lots of time in the nearby textile factory his family owned when he was growing up. Uddhav and his sister Videhi, who co-founded Wastewear with him, played with discarded fabric and yarn as children. As adults, however, they began to understand the global impact that the yarn, textile, and garment manufacturing business had on the environment, and they wanted to turn the page to a new chapter. Wastewear was founded during Uddhav's time at Babson, and their first goal was to try and sell college merch. But soon, due to their convictions, the company evolved into a fashion brand for basic garments that uses primarily textile and plastic waste and a dye-free process to create high-quality wholesale garments and bags for businesses. We'll hear some sounds from the factory, as Uddhav explains.
Since my childhood, I've had a lot of experiences watching textiles being manufactured. Coming from a family business involved in textile manufacturing, I've literally seen from the ground level of how the textiles and garments are made from start to finish. And these experiences early on really made me question all the aspects of the process and the mechanics behind, whether it's production, whether it's design aspects, whether it's working with brands to understand what their needs are, and just learning about how materials influence products was one of my bigger interests when it came to this industry. And today that's gone on and become one of the most important pillars that Wastewear is built on, is actually understanding how materials work and how they can best be used to make the biggest impact. Watching textiles being made, you normally just have a focus on the finished product, but you don't really see what goes on behind it. Just the waste outputs that I saw being created at every stage of the manufacturing process really caught my attention. Waste is created at every single stage, right from when you process the fiber to make it ready for spinning, when you make fabrics, then when you make products, cutting waste comes out of the production, and then we have leftover fabrics and unused finished products that have, been not sold at the end of the season and are now just sitting as leftover inventory. And waste is also created once consumers are finished using their clothes, which is also a large waste stream. And all these things just spoke to me as a whole that this industry is creating so much waste, and there's definitely something we can do about it. And that's the basic idea that led us to take a deep dive into our family business as a starting point, just to have something to understand how this process looks, what we can do to potentially make a difference, and what we can offer to combat these problems. And where we landed was making a difference with the use of the right materials, which is recycled materials for us. By using only 100% recycled materials in our products, which was a big challenge in many different ways, we eliminate the need to grow new cotton, mine more oil to make new polyester, and eliminate the use of dyes, which saves large amounts of water. So just by using this material, there's such a big impact that it became our mission to figure out how to best use these materials and grow their use throughout the textile and fashion industries.
Uddhav's idea for a completely circular fashion brand as a solution to help stem the flow of waste streams in the textile industry was putting him on the cutting edge of the global fashion industry. In total, the textile industry is only 0.3% circular or completely post-consumer in origin, meaning that over 99% of materials the industry consumes each year is virgin material. The fashion industry accounts for somewhere between 2 and 8% of global carbon emissions, and as such has earned the reputation as one of the least sustainable industries out there. And changing that is no easy task. But regulations are changing, turning the attention of the industry.
Sustainability is important for any business today just because of how the regulations are being set on a global scale. Like one specific one that is really being talked about right now, especially here in the States, is the new EPR law for textiles in California. So this extended producer responsibility law actually holds the producers responsible for the entire life cycle of the product, in terms of collection, sorting, recycling, and disposing these things. So what happens is that as producers or as designers, we design things just based on how they look and how they feel. But we don't really think of what's going to happen at the end of life, because not everything can be recycled today. Like if you have a really complex blend of materials that something is made out of, it makes it more and more difficult to recycle that. So just keeping these things in mind has become very important. And that's just one example of regulation for textiles and sustainability. But there's a lot of stuff happening around the world. EU is very, very serious about how we talk about sustainable materials on the garments because of how much greenwashing there is. And that just shows the whole landscape is changing. And yes, if you are not doing the right things when it comes to sustainability, especially in textiles and fashion, you are going to be left behind.
When I ask Uddhav about informed consumerism, especially for people living in the West who don't see the bulk of the production or waste that goes into manufacturing clothes, he has both insights and ideas. But it goes beyond manufacturing and is also about how consumers dispose of unwanted clothing. Sustainability, he argues, is a joint effort between brands and consumers.
So you asked about the different types of waste. So going right from how these textiles are manufactured, there's of course a lot of waste that comes out. But for consumers, it's a very important consideration to see where the product is going, once it's reached the end of its life cycle. Keeping that in mind, I think, is the core of the whole concept of circularity in textiles, is that the end of the product life cycle is as important as how it's being made and how it's being consumed. When we talk about sustainability, usually our mind directly goes to the environmental side of it. But people are a part of the sustainable mission as well. This is like my personal view and problem with Western countries that have the highest levels of consumption, that it's very easy to, just because of the systems we have in place here in the Western part of the world, where manufacturing does not happen here most of the time, all the consumption happens here, and then the disposal again goes away from here. For us, it's very out of sight, out of mind. There's so many organizations that are involved in collecting textiles in the States who take donations or who buy old textiles from consumers. Basically, containers are filled up with used clothes and shipped all over the world, where they can further be segregated and processed. Like for us, it might seem as if, okay, at the end of the year or when a time comes for spring cleaning, we might go and drop off a bag of clothes at a Goodwill or today at an H&M into that box where things might be recycled. But the reality of the matter is not everything in that bag that you're donating is going to be recycled, because it can't.
Uddhav says that it comes down to educating brands and consumers and also presenting sustainable options in the marketplace.
I think it's a collective responsibility, and it can't be pointed to either brands or consumers individually. Every stakeholder involved has their own responsibility. Education actually plays a large role in this, in both terms of consumers making better choices and brands offering the better choices. When you walk into a store and you have all these clothing options as a consumer, you don't find yourself going and reading the tags to see what this might be made of. You just choose from the look and feel of it as a consumer. And as a brand, you're pretty much doing the same thing. But if both worked together and brands offered sustainable options in the store without even saying that these are sustainable options, I really doubt consumers will have a problem with that. In my experience, it's that if brands offered sustainable products, consumers will automatically use them without hesitation. And it's all about how easy, as an industry, we make access to these solutions for consumers.
I spoke with Dr. Brigitte Muehlmann, a tenured full professor in Babson's accounting department on the Babson campus. She's been teaching at Babson since 1992 after a career in corporate finance. She's authored over 100 publications, including an award-winning publication on sustainability and ESG in accounting, and she's the recipient of the Cook Prize, the Deloitte Teaching Innovation Award, and many others. She's here today to help us make sense of the state of sustainability in business today and how financials can help tell the story of a company's sustainability efforts and the health of the business overall. Brigitte is a self-described humanist and practical philosopher, and so I was curious as to how she became interested in accounting. And so for that, we've got to take a little side trip back to the Viennese countryside.
You know, I grew up in Vienna, in Austria, where people like to have their glass of wine. My late father, he, among other things, he started a winery. And people loved his wines. My family actually allowed my brother, sister, and me, they integrated us. We met the suppliers, the customers, everybody, right? The only person I was not allowed to meet was the accountant. But every time after a meeting, they talked about those amazing strategy conversations they had. So as I was listening to all this, I found that really intriguing. And because I wasn't supposed to know about the money they made, etc., I volunteered to help with accounting. And that's actually how I got interested.
Now we'll dive into environmental social governance, or ESG, in accounting, and how and why these metrics are used when companies are trying to track and quantify sustainability.
So we were talking about ESG metrics in accounting. I would just love to learn more about it, sort of in layman's terms.
Happy to do so. So I would like to share with you 3 things that I have created that might be most appropriate. First of all, the model I have created is built on work by my colleagues in entrepreneurship who have identified that there are 5 key entrepreneurial practices. So entrepreneurs, they have the practice of play, the practice of empathy, the practice of creation, the practice of experimenting, and the practice of reflection. And so when I looked at this, I realized that accounting plays a role in some of those practices. And the way I look at it is as follows. First of all, everybody needs to play because it's important that we gain perspective, we zoom out, so to speak. And then in entrepreneurship, we identify a pain point, usually a pain point in humanity, that somebody addresses with empathy and therefore establishes a business purpose. And that's when we develop a strategy and we developed financial projections. Action happens when we experiment. So we put the plan into place. And as we do this, we create data. In accounting, we captured specific data and then we organize that data, which brings us to the last practice, the practice of reflection. We organize the data into financial reports and sustainability reports so that we have meaningful reflection, because we all learn when we reflect. Accounting comes in with capturing the data and then organizing the data for reflection. That's really where the meat of accounting takes place. The question now becomes which data should we collect, right? And this is where we are used to capturing economic data for the financial reports, but we can also capture sustainability data. And the sustainability data usually is organized into 3 buckets. They are the environmental factors, the social factors, and the governance factors.
A quick aside here, Brigitte realized that this amount of data beyond the financials would be overwhelming to most people. So she devised a quicker system, a checkup, if you will, comprised of 3 parts that can be used to put all this data into context for key decision makers.
There are 3 spheres. The first sphere is the pulse check. In a business, cash is the pulse. If a business runs out of cash, it really doesn't matter anymore what other good ideas we have and what other good things we want to do. Then, beyond that pulse check, there is the traditional workup. So when we go to the doctor, usually there is a blood test, a urine test, and then we get a whole long list of ratios. That's what often happens with financial ratios. There's this long list of ratios, and that tells us a lot about the health of a business. But then there's one more, and that's the whole health. Now, the whole health is all about the habits. And we know that there are people who have bad habits, and occasionally they go to the doctor to have a checkup just to make sure that nothing can be seen.
Sure, yeah.
You seem to be able to relate to that.
Yeah.
So
for example, you're smoking, a bunch of cigarettes every day, but as long as your lung function test comes back okay and your blood pressure isn't too high, you're gonna say we're fine, we're good here. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And yet, when you think about it, and these early indicators that there is a higher likelihood that something will be wrong in the future. And that's what we capture with the environmental, the social, and the governance factors. It's about the habit of the business.
That's a great pivot. So if you're talking to a student who's looking at a career in finance or accounting and wants to have an impact on sustainability, what are some career options you might talk about?
Well, so there are many opportunities. Many companies have teams, multidisciplinary teams, where they invite somebody in who also comes from the finance side. And if they understand where the others are coming from, and they know how this can be reported and how these pieces fit together, they also can contribute to increasing sustainability or to realize an effort in a win-win situation.
So it becomes a collaboration.
Totally.
It's a job skill that they're bringing to the table, as opposed to saying like, okay, we have to figure out how to do this. It's going against what we're trying to do. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, facilitate. And obviously there are reporting mechanisms and frameworks and all kinds of things. They need to know if they go into finance. The most important thing in finance, however, I believe, is understanding intangible assets. The market capitalization of the S&P 500 companies 50 years ago used to be more than 80% tangible assets and less than 20% intangible assets. Now it's reverse. Now the intangibles, what are they? Oftentimes the most valuable intangible of a business is its brand. How do we enhance a brand? We enhance it, the name of the company and what it stands for and its products to the customers. I think our students come to Babson because they want to learn to do business in a good way. They want to be successful, also economically. That brings us back to the beginning of our conversation. When my father was basically on his deathbed, this came back to me, and I asked him, I said, so what was it actually that made your wine so different? My father said, the wines I made were organic. I said, you never ever talked about that. He said, yeah, because, and you know this was in the 1970s, 80s. He said, this wouldn't have sold. But doing the right thing made his winery successful. Isn't that what we want?
It was doing the right thing that garnered all these loyal
Yes.
customers.
Yes.
That made it so
Yes.
nobody had headaches in the morning.
Yes, yes. And so my father, there was this sentence that he had created, and it's in German. He said, tue recht und schaue niemand. And that, do well by doing good.
Do well by doing good. I love that.
Depending on where you are in the factory, in research and development, obviously there's a lot of discussions, prototypes going off. You hear random audio noises, different frequency sweeps, lots of things that are actually somewhat unpleasant, but they're doing measurements and things. And then once you get down to the factory floor, it's sort of that plus the din of production machines and the hum of fluorescent lights.
Sam Herec, heard here on the floor of a factory in China, is the VP of Product and Sustainability at TIvoli Audio and a very recent graduate of Babson's MBA program, the class of 25. Sam earned his undergraduate degree in engineering at Northeastern and then worked in high-end consumer audio for a few years. During that time, he lived abroad in China and traveled extensively through Asia for business, spending lots of time in the factories where products were manufactured and meeting with suppliers. It was also during this period in his life that he experienced a pivotal moment, one that would put him on the path to working on sustainability as an entrepreneurial leader.
One of the moments early on in my career when I was living in China, I was flying from Shanghai to Shenzhen, and I looked out the window of the plane, and I saw basically an island of styrofoam. And I realized there's this giant patch of styrofoam that's floating out in the ocean, and it's something that was created to move a good from point A to point B, when it was only necessary for a week, 2 weeks, whatever it was, but now it's going to be there for, the rest of our lives at least. That was sort of what first flipped the switch for me. that's when the whole scheme of, waste and plastics and things like that becomes a little bit hard to even fathom. Thinking about some of the power that is necessary to create certain things. For some of our products, they're large plastic pieces. And the amount of energy and force that's needed to kind of push the plastics into the mold is also, another thing that we're conscious of too. So trying to find not only renewable energy solutions for that, but then also have them be able to be used in industrial capacities, because like the output of a solar panel is not going to be able to deal with the energy spike that you need to push the plastic through the mold. So you'd have to have some other type of solution. So just really seeing each stage of the process at the factories is something that really kind of hammers it home, versus if I was always sort of just dictating the design from Boston and then just having a prototype show up in a box and never, seeing everything.
Now, let's go back to when Sam took Professor Muehlmann's accounting class and started thinking about how to integrate sustainability metrics into the company's bottom line.
That was my first class actually at Babson. So right from the start, I had this window into the world of sustainability, ESG, whatever you want to call it now. We were learning the basics of, how you're supposed to actually keep books and where things go. But towards the end of it, that's when she got into sort of this new, it's a relatively new idea in public companies of, ESG type bookkeeping, and trying to sort of quantify those factors and how those should actually fit onto a company's balance sheet.
At TIvoli Audio, they're a small boutique audio company making high-end Bluetooth speakers and radios, sometimes with wireless streaming capabilities. They list competitors like JBL and Sonos.
We use kind of established technology, so we do have, FM and DAB radio, Bluetooth, but then also obviously all of the Wi-Fi streaming and everything. But with our products, we use kind of a mix of materials. We have wood incorporated with a lot of our designs too, so that's another differentiator for us.
Sam says that in his vertical of consumer audio products, thinking outside your silo and building coalitions between suppliers, factories, and even other companies can allow for more progress than he would be able to achieve on his own at TIvoli.
Well, when you're a smaller company, it's a little bit difficult. Number one, because cash is always tight. So, if you're Apple, you can make a splash and you can spend $50 million on something. And if it doesn't work out, aside from some rabble from shareholders, it doesn't really sink the company. Whereas if I make a $20,000 mistake, that can actually really hurt the company, in the short term. So you have to try to find the low-hanging fruit that's free, essentially, or see what larger partners you might have who are willing to, help you out. You really have to kind of think differently than, hey, here's this big idea I want to do, let's do it. That kind of goes into building coalitions and trying to make your company, from what you're trying to do in sustainability, larger than it actually is. So, for example, for us, it's trying to find other, even competitors in the audio space who might actually want to do some of these initiatives, so we can push our manufacturing partners to take something up. Because if it's an expensive initiative that TIvoli cannot fund, if it's only for us, the factory, they won't see a return on it, so they don't want to do it. But if it's not only us, but 3 or 4 of their other customers asking for it, then it can actually, tip the scale in favor of moving forward on whether it's changing their energy mix or sourcing more sustainable packaging materials or whatever it is. For example, you can see who else is being manufactured at a factory. Say, hey, I know you guys have styrofoam too. Obviously, we compete, but is this something where maybe we can both have a benefit? You have to feel out individuals, whoever you know in your network, whoever you can contact, and it's a slog. You do get a lot of no's, you get a lot of skepticism, but I think it's the facts in the long run are there to keep pushing it. You have to make yourself a bigger fish than you are sometimes to get the attention that you need for these things.
Sam feels like the quality of a product also plays an important role in sustainability. If you don't build something for planned obsolescence, or in other words, to function for only a finite period of time, then you have more value to offer consumers and a case to make for paying a higher price.
When you're trying to look at how you can make your company, your brand, more sustainable and better for the planet, focusing on the longevity and the quality of the products, and then also sort of seeing from your product development cycle how you can try to optimize your carbon output, basically. So making less prototypes, looking at market diversification versus product diversification. TIvoli historically has had a large market presence in Europe and a smaller one in the United States, even though the company actually was founded in Boston. When you look at products that appeal to consumers in Europe and they appeal to consumers in the US, there's emerging markets all over the world. So it's trying to find those new markets as well, where maybe consumers 5 or 10 years ago wouldn't be purchasing these types of products or wouldn't find these types of products attractive, and they now do. But there is a lot of data and there's a lot of cases proving that, these initiatives not only are good for the planet, but they're also good for business. But it is a very complicated problem, which is why it hasn't, been just solved and done with.
Thanks for joining us on From Problems to Possibilities, and thanks to our guests, Uddhav, Professor Muehlmann, and Sam. We're inspired by your entrepreneurial leadership advocacy and the amazing strides you've made towards a more sustainable future with a lot less waste. Coming up in our next episode, join us as we talk to entrepreneurial leaders in the Babson community and beyond who are using their skills to tackle mental health and inclusivity in sports.
These athletes who we think of as very strong and very successful, and in many cases very tough, they in fact are also grappling with mental health.
You're listening to From Problems to Possibilities, Entrepreneurial Leadership in Action, presented by Babson College. On this podcast, we hear about how entrepreneurial leaders identify and solve problems in our world straight from the people that make it happen every day in Babson's global community and beyond. I'm your host, Maddie Poirier from Babson College here in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Until next time.